And here we go again. It is another Penguins live chat here on the Pittsburgh Hockey Now and the National Hockey Now YouTube page. Hi, I'm Dan Kingerski. So here's what we're going to do today. We, of course, have to dive more into the David Quinn hiring. He joins the Penguins as an assistant coach. Conspicuously absent in the Penguins' release was that Quinn will handle the power play. So either they don't want to admit it or he's not going to be the guy running the power play. Either they'll give that to Vellucci or Ty Hennis or Mike Sullivan will, in fact, run it. So that's where we stand on that. We're going to dive into the nuances and I think the complexity of the hiring. There are definitely some positives to it. So I don't think anybody is too terribly surprised. I think maybe the biggest surprise was it took till June 12th to hire David Quinn. Yeah, maybe he was waiting on a head coaching job. Maybe he had to decide if he wanted to cannonball back into coaching after what had to be just an extraordinarily difficult, just a beat down sort of season leading the San Jose Sharks, which had the worst record in the NHL. So let's see here. We'll talk about David Quinn. I think we are waiting on the Wilkes-Barre Penguins announcement that they're going to hire Grant Potolny, head coach of Northern Michigan. Not exactly a household name if you're not, in that college hockey world. The interesting thing about Grant is that he was Jason Spezza's teammate back in 04-05 during the lockout when Spezza played in the Senators minor league system, played for the Binghamton Senators back then. They were teammates then. So there is obviously a direct connection. We'll talk a bit about the coming free agency and the connection to the NHL trade market, because listen, whenever Jim Rutherford's involved, things are going to get fun. And Vancouver starting to wheel and deal and make some noise with an old friend of yours, Jake Guentzel. Will they acquire him from the Carolina Hurricanes in an effort to sign him to a bigger contract or just get exclusive negotiating rights for a couple of weeks? So we're going to dive into all of that. Do me a favor. Of course, I want you to check out Pittsburgh Hockey Now, where we have all of the breaking news and highlights and analysis. Let me type it in here. There we go. There. Go visit that in the comments section. So let's talk about David Quinn, first of all. Let me share the screen because I know you don't want to be looking at my ugly mug the entire time. And oh, there it is. Okay. Wait, that's not the one I wanted. Let me hang on. Let me pull up David Quinn here on Pittsburgh Hockey Now. What can I say? I'm a radio guy. I'm a writer. I'm not necessarily a fly by the seat of my pants YouTuber. Although this is as close to radio, talk radio, as we can probably get with your immediate questions and comments. So there we go. Penguins make David Quinn hire. Official inside scoop on the Penguins hire. Now, first thing I did yesterday after the news broke, I called up Sheng Peng, who's our beat writer with San Jose Hockey Now, and said, Sheng, how did it go last year? Tell me a bit more about Quinn. So here's, I think, where we start the positives. Quinn realized what kind of team he had. In other words, not very good. He turned Erik Karlsson loose. He designed a platform, a system by which Karlsson was the featured star, by which Karlsson could do all of the things that Erik Karlsson can do. And that was the system built around Erik Karlsson. Obviously, they didn't make the playoffs, but they were far more competitive 2 years ago than they were last season when they began the year with 11 straight losses before they beat the Philadelphia Flyers. And I think they had a 12-game losing streak in the middle of the season as well. And it was a nightmare. There was some tension in the dressing room, I think, between Quinn and some of the players. To what degree, we don't entirely know. It could have been a 15-minute bug. It could have been a roiling thing. Obviously, Quinn's termination after just 2 years, just beginning the rebuild, clearly says there were probably a few more tensions than just the passing, player flippantness or whatnot. That's maybe the downside of hiring David Quinn, is we're not quite sure how he handles the room. He wasn't successful in New York. 3 seasons, no playoff appearances. 2 seasons in San Jose, from bad to worse. So will the players, I think they buy into Mike Sullivan. How does David Quinn affect that dynamic? We will only know that answer, I think, after Christmas. Getting into 2025, we won't know anything until then. What we do know, and swinging back to the positive, is that Quinn can look at Erik Karlsson and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. And Karlsson's going to buy in, because Sheng unequivocally said that Quinn and Karlsson had a very good relationship for their 1 year together anyway in San Jose. So obviously that was probably part of the hiring as well, is that David Quinn, A, knows how to use Erik Karlsson, B, can communicate with him very well. I would say C, he probably can apply a lot of that he's going to talk to Erik Karlsson about to Chris Letang. Maybe even P.O. Joseph. Drag a little more offense out of Pojo and see where that takes you. All in all, I will grade the hire very well. I actually didn't think it was going to happen because it had gone this long without happening. But here we are. And I'm a little bit curious your reactions, because Mike Sullivan clearly is a lightning rod for many of you. And, are you viewing this as a buddy hire, or are you viewing this as a very good hire? And I won't lie, my first kind of thought, I first went to Donnie Brasco. Yeah, I got sent for. Hey, do me a favor. If you talk to Donnie, tell him if it was anybody, I'm glad it was him. I kind of had that Mike Sullivan, saying to his wife one morning, if it was anybody, tell David I'm glad it was him. If the Penguins do have to make a change, obviously Quinn is quite qualified. BJ, we're going to dive into the questions here before I get to the trade and free agency market. At least a couple of questions here. How's it going, Dan? I'm peachy. I am good with the new hire for Quinn for sure. ML says, do you think the Oilers come back from a 2-0 hole? Absolutely not. I picked the Panthers in 5. I picked the Panthers to win the Stanley Cup before the playoffs. I picked the Panthers to win the Stanley Cup, kind of beginning of the season. Certainly, I confirmed that with myself when I saw them in person, November, December. They're just, they clearly are Stanley Cup timber, top to bottom, coach. And I mean, come on. I don't know how popular Evan Rodriguez was with Penguins fans. I know he was kind of popular in our little circle. It's kind of nice to see him getting all of this love from the press and the people covering the Stanley Cup final. And when he scored that second goal in Game 2 to go up 3-1, the smile on his face was priceless. He's a good dude, and he's going to lift that Stanley Cup in good health. He's going to do that with pride. But no, I do not think the Oilers come back from 2-0. I am not as bullish on the Oilers as everybody else is. To me, the Oilers are 2.5 players. They are McDavid, they are Draisaitl, and they are Evan Bouchard. They don't have the depth. They don't have the killer instinct. They don't have the physicality. Just so much they don't have. They are here because Connor McDavid is so great. Full stop. Brian says, I read on a message board that the Penguins management is incompetent. What say you? I'm going to go ahead and take that as sarcasm. I think it is interesting, and I'm going to maybe twist it here just to serious tones, Brian, just for the sake of the chat. This Penguins organization, the management, does it strike anybody else? Has anybody else realized how similar Kyle Dubas is running the operation compared to Ron Hextall? Some of the Penguins people might disagree because I hear Dubas is more open, has brought a family atmosphere back to the organization. He certainly is forward thinking on a lot of the things like the analytics, and while Cap Friendly goes away here in a few weeks, the Penguins had already been working on their internal solution to that. So, I would say Dubas has done a better job wide-ranging, but the reality is both Dubas and Hextall kind of get their 3 or 4 people in a room and lock the door. I'm curious why it is perceived so differently, though. Whereas Dubas is a breath of fresh air and Hextall was vile. Or, it was wrong and Hextall was a bad person for doing the exact same thing. Also, I will point out it's June 12th. And the Penguins have made 0 personnel changes to this point. We are 16 days away from the draft, which means we are 19 days away. 19? If I'm off by 1, you'll forgive me. From the NHL free agent frenzy. So I would expect the changes to start happening here anytime now. But it's just funny that, Mike Sullivan, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, the power play are still getting a lot of the heat from this past disappointing regular season. And Dubas isn't. Toronto fans are kind of throwing some bombs from up north. They're lobbing some grenades into the message boards and social media about Dubas. But I don't see Penguins fans doing that. And I find that interesting. I'm not saying you should. I just find those dichotomy of personalities very interesting, how people perceive the same actions by 2 very different people. Actually, I wrote some academic papers on that back in college. It's called attribution theory. Yeah, I don't think you want me to dive into my academic papers. I actually got to graduate early the second time by taking graduate courses, and I love those. There were some heavy hitters, and I may or may not have excelled. Jake Bacon. I personally like the Quinn hire. What are my thoughts? Well, okay, I guess I've spent a few minutes on that. Rich F thinks it's both. It's a good hire and a buddy hire. I think the personal dynamic between Sullivan and Quinn is going to be interesting insofar as how it plays out with the players and with the team. I would think. I guess it's different for every person, right? Or the interpersonal dynamics of every relationship are a little bit different. I would suspect, or I would assume, that Quinn can say a few things to Sullivan that nobody else could. He can probably get away with delivering some bad news or some harsh critiques that maybe others wouldn't have delivered to quite, the degree with Mike Sullivan. I suppose Rick Tocchet used to do that sort of stuff as well. Just unsugared, here you go, here's what I see, here's what I think. It helped the Penguins. perhaps Quinn will be able to bring that same fresh wind to the Penguins, because clearly not everything smells so great in a locker room of a team that has missed the playoffs 2 straight years and clearly should have been a lot better than they were this season. They underachieved, full stop. Thomas, new face, new outlook. I hope what we had wasn't working. Sully on the hot seat next. You know what? That is something that is true, Thomas. And I joke about Donnie Brasco. Tell Donnie I'm glad it was him. But there will come a time when the Penguins and Mike Sullivan have to part ways for one reason or another. And listen, if they get off to a bad start this next season, let's say by Thanksgiving, they're under 500. Dubas will have made whatever changes he could. They will have prepared an entire offseason to resurrect this team. And unless it's general manager error or they're relying on too many young players who aren't performing, where, those things maybe you can give the coach a pass. But let's just say they've got another team that should be in playoff contention, and they're not. You're absolutely right. Mike Sullivan's seat could fry an egg. No question about it. Jim Stripsky says, will Draisaitl need to answer the bell for his dirty hit on Barkov? I don't know if you saw the press conference on Tuesday. Paul Maurice said McDavid and Draisaitl should keep their heads up. I don't think you'll see Draisaitl forced to fight because he's a star player. You just know he won't. Maybe Tkachuk can goad him into it. I don't think so. But I do think you will see somebody knock his block off. Brian loves me. I love you too, Brian. Let's see here. Is Dubas's tendency to want to pick up the hottest free agent in the offseason, Tavares, Karlsson, over building a deeper team, a problem? That is really interesting. In fact, you know what, Jim? I'm going to steal that for a column. I'm actually writing that down. Tavares, at the time Toronto got him, he was the hottest free agent, but also he was seen by everybody universally as the guy that could put Toronto over the top. He could take that young core, Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and take them to the next level where Patrick Marleau left off. And it kind of worked. Dubas definitely does have a sweet tooth for the big names, doesn't he? What Dubas has failed to do in building his teams, I think, is properly adjust for the conflict between reality and the numbers. And let's be crystal clear. The bridge to those two is physicality, toughness, bulk, all of those old school qualities and things. And so the Maple Leafs were always trying to add a piece of grit as if that can remake a softer roster. You can have Ryan Reeves. You can have a bit of Michael Bunting. You can have Mark Giordano. But unless it's kind of dispersed throughout your lineup, unless your team takes on that attitude, it's kind of worthless. So I don't think chasing the big name is Dubas's problem, but it's a very interesting observation. Good job there. That's okay. Aiden Jansen, do you think there's going to Or do you think they're going to... Oh, I see. Okay, wrong there. Gotcha. Now I'm plugged in. Do you think they are going to hire someone at the AHL level for head coach that they could look at in the future for the head coach for the NHL like they did with Sullivan? No. I would hazard a guess that a guy coming from Northern Michigan, which is Grant Patolny, they haven't made that official, at least that I've seen yet. Probably waiting for this show to start to make it official. That would be a leap of epic proportions. I mean, that would be a leap bigger than Dave Hackstall made from North Dakota to Philadelphia. That would certainly, that would be digging back into the 80s when guys would snag a juniors coach. Coaching has just come so far. It's so nuanced and so important now that you can't get away with an amateur, a guy who doesn't really know what he's doing yet. So I suppose in a few years, their AHL coach with some seasoning and some tutelage might pull it all together and become the hot guy, where everyone's like, ooh, I want him to be my next head coach. It's possible. We'll see. I will tell you, if it is the Northern Michigan guy, their trajectory over the last couple of years has been like this, not like this. Take that for what it's worth. All right, let me dive back into the trade and the free agent market. You can keep those questions and such coming. I do see them. It was confirmed this week that leading up to the NHL trade deadline, get this, Jim Rutherford was going after... hang on here. We'll just do this. Jim Rutherford was going after Jake Guentzel. To get Guentzel in Vancouver, he needed to clear salary cap space. He offered Elias Lindholm to Boston in order to do it. Now, I guess Vancouver kind of got the cold feet on that, or they couldn't come to a deal with Boston. Where that broke down, I'm not entirely sure. But realize that that the Vancouver Canucks are working it. And whenever Jim Rutherford and his protege, Patrick Allvin, are there, they're going to do something. Those guys do not mess around. They don't sit on their hands. They don't wait for other teams to make a move and then sneak in and pick up leftovers. They go in hot and heavy, and they go in first. So you're wondering now if Vancouver will give up that, let's call it a 4th-round pick for Jake Guentzel's rights. Because Elias Lindholm turned down Vancouver's offer for 7 years, $7 million per. I understand why Vancouver only offered that. At midseason, Lindholm's value is up around $8.5, $9 million, maybe even $9.5 million. But he was a half a point per game player in Vancouver, really didn't lift his game in the playoffs. And so Vancouver can basically walk away, put the money in their pocket, and throw it at Jake Guentzel. But will they wait until July 1st to do it, or will they give up the pick to get him in there? Here's a side note to all of this. Have any of you noticed that nobody can seem to sign Jake Guentzel? The Penguins had a conversation and backed off immediately. Carolina really went for it and then had to back off. How much does Guentzel really want? Is Jake Guentzel seeing his 40-goal resume, 40 goals a season resume, and asking for like Mitch Marner money, 10.5, 11, with the spiking cap? All respect to Jake Guentzel if he wants to swim in those waters. One, I'm out. I'll pass. Unless, I guess two would be unless I can get him on a shorter contract. Otherwise, if he's looking for like 770, no, absolutely not. Now, we don't know what Jake Guentzel is looking for, but again, absolutely, positively, no dice at those kind of numbers. Anything really beyond 8.5, I'm passing on Jake Guentzel. There is another little trade deal floating out there that I think really does affect the Penguins. Let me pull it up here. And that would be this one. Let me share it. Wait for it. Here we go. New Jersey Hockey Now. Why a Devils trade for Jacob Markstrom makes sense. The Devils are in the driver's seat for Markstrom. They've been chasing him since the trade deadline when somebody in the Flames organization put the kibosh on the trade. Apparently it was agreed to. And whether a president or somewhere in ownership, they said, nope, not a happening. New Jersey is still working. They're New Jersey's current goalies, Jake Allen, Kaapo Kähkönen. Yeah, come on now. For all the Penguins fans who stomp their feet and hold their breath and, talk about Tristan Jarry, just imagine that goaltending tandem. Jake Allen and Kaapo Kähkönen. Sub 900. And you're not getting, a great chance to win every night. So I was trying to see who New Jersey might have to give up. New Jersey does have the 10th overall pick. Boy, that would seem incredibly, that would be valuable. An overpay. That's the word I'm looking for. That would be an overpay for a 34-year-old goalie. But they might get it. Just think of what happens to New Jersey next season when Dougie Hamilton comes back. They've got a goaltender like Jacob Markstrom in net, a healthy Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, some of the young players they've got continuing to grow, not to mention the cap space they're going to have from Michael McLeod not being available for hockey activities for at least the next couple of years. They're going to, New Jersey, in my mind, if they don't give up the farm for Markstrom, New Jersey goes from out of the playoffs, behind the Penguins actually, to that second tier of Stanley Cup contenders. I don't think I'd put them quite in the level with Colorado and Florida. Probably, I think Vegas will return to that top tier if they get healthy. But then I would put New Jersey in that second tier with Edmonton and teams that could win the Stanley Cup. I forgot Dallas. Dallas should be a top tier team too, provided they re-sign Tanev and Duchesne. If they don't re-sign Duchesne, all bets are off on where Dallas falls. But I think New Jersey jumps up, and all of a sudden at the top of the Metro Division, you've got the Rangers, the Hurricanes, and the Devils as the top three, with a distinct gap then down to the Islanders, the Capitals, the Penguins, the Flyers. I'm not even sure if any of those teams would be playoff teams next year, because now you're going to be getting stomped by the three teams at the top of the division for most of the season. Then again, Boston, Boston has tons of money to spend. Buffalo and Ottawa eventually have to figure it out, right? Detroit is on the way. So the Metro really could finally hit those hard times. But I think I think that is the trade to watch is New Jersey and Markstrom. Let's see here. Jim, will I ever be able to go from Hockey Now site to site without needing to log into each one separately? Yes, very soon. But at least you can get there without, once you log in. I know it's annoying to me too when I want to just roll through all the sites very quickly and talk to my writers, read some stories, and get caught up. Yeah, it's annoying to me too. We are in the process. I think July 5th or July 6th is kind of our Armageddon. We have partnered up with a heavy hitter who is going to take us to the next level and the next level and the next level. A team of tech people are standing by. They're going to increase our ad revenues. They're going to change a lot of the ads you see on the site. That I forget what they call it. Like when you go from page to page, that ad shows up over the page every time. That's going away too. I will ask you to subscribe to PHN Plus because once we start making more money on these ads, there'll be less ads, but also that will allow us to do more subscription stories as we add staff and we really we're going for it. Let's see here. What happened to Zach Aston Reese? Was always so talked about in Pitt, now buried in Toronto. Oh, is he? No, he was Detroit. He was in Grand Rapids. He was in the playoffs, Grand Rapids, and yeah, he went from Toronto to Detroit. Actually, Toronto to Carolina, traded to Detroit. Was that how it went this year? Anyway, yeah, he scored a couple big goals in the AHL playoffs. I've talked about this before. Aston Reese had one enemy, himself. If he ever trusted his instincts and his abilities, if he were ever half as confident as some of the guys who aren't as good as him, he would be a top 9 player in the NHL. I have no doubts about that. Jim likes coffee. Odds we get Guentzel back, Tyson asks. 1 in 50? 2%? 1 in 25? Maybe a 4? I'll go back to this. Why would the Penguins have not signed Jake Guentzel? If they had any intention of bringing him back, why didn't it happen? You say, oh, well, look, they hoodwinked everybody. They got the prospects, and that's not how things work. Because that is a quick way to make sure that no GM will ever deal with you again. If they think they got hoodwinked, I mean, that's more fan conspiracy sort of thing. It's possible, I think, in this context. If Guentzel looks at all of the offers around the league that are coming his way, he's not happy with them. Let's say they're all coming in at that $8.5 million range when he wanted much more than that. Could he say to the Penguins, all right, I was wrong, you were right. You're good looking, I'm not very handsome. You're very smart, I'm kind of dumb. Will you give me that 8.5? That would be the scenario by which Jake Guentzel, I think, would return. But I don't see it as likely. Think about this. The Penguins are going to have about $10 million after they sign P.O. Joseph and take care of, the little roster holes. They're going to have about $10 million to spend. Why would they spend it all on Jake Guentzel to put on the left wing? That would basically be running it back to try it again. Everyone talks about changes. Oh, the Penguins need changes. They need to refresh. They need to retool. They need to rebuild. And here's a guy everyone likes, and they're like, bring him back. Jake Guentzel was part of that very underachieving Penguins team for the last 2 seasons. I think I might have checkmated somebody on that one. Let's see here. Yeah, conspiracy. Someone beat me to it, it looks like. When the Pens signed Malkin, they made the decision on Guentzel. Can't afford. Well, they could afford Guentzel, Keith. I would rather had Guentzel, but I guess Dubas loves the aging Malkin. Well, actually, Ron Hextall signed Malkin, not Kyle Dubas. And that listen, don't forget, that Malkin thing went down to the wire. When did he sign? June 30th? June 29th? No joke. He was headed toward free agency. And the market was basically down to Vincent Trocheck, Evgeny Malkin. So the Penguins probably felt a little bit of pressure. If they let Malkin go to market, they lose him because he's going to just give them the middle finger. If then they don't sign Vincent Trocheck, because, at that point, blood is in the water, and any of the Metro teams could have just wadded up a pot. Let's just say the New York Rangers see the Penguins in trouble. Would they have paid Trocheck $500,000 more to make sure he came to New York instead of Pittsburgh? Yeah, they would have. And the Penguins would have been desperate. And they would have overpaid or tried to overpay for Trocheck. It would have just been an absolute mess. So signing Malkin in that moment, even to a 4-year contract, was not a terrible move whatsoever. And I'll just keep repeating this until people pick up on it. The big mistake in re-signing Evgeny Malkin was making it a 35-plus contract. And that was done by structuring the deal in such an amateurish way where there are signing bonuses. Bigger salaries up front, smaller salaries in the back, signing bonuses in the back, which triggered that 35-plus provision. Basically meaning a no trade clause, no movement clause, well, it wasn't necessary. Malkin had already won when he made it a 35-plus contract because nobody was going to touch it. And the Penguins have to pay him out anyway. 100%. That's where Hextall made the big mistake. Okay. Malkin is still a world-class player, and that he had 2 new wingers every month. Don't forget. I know there are people pushing that narrative. I got to tell you, kids, I was there every night. I was there over 70 games. I watched intently Evgeny Malkin, and he is not a world-class player right now. Maybe his knees get strengthened this summer. That has happened, right? 18 months now, 2.5 years after knee surgery, you recoup it, but he's also going to be 38. And that gallop, even he said that gallop is kind of gone. So that whole thing, the wingers didn't finish for him. I know the analytics say that. My eyes said absolutely not. Sure, the wingers could have finished a few more. Riley Smith went absolutely ice cold. I get all of that. But Malkin wasn't Malkin either, and that was the bigger issue of the two. Let's see here. Tyson wants to know where Guentzel goes. I do think Guentzel winds up in Vancouver because Rutherford knows how valuable he is. Don't forget, it was Jim Rutherford that threw a 6-year, $36 million contract at Guentzel. When Guentzel was, 23? Had like a half a whole year in the NHL, and Rutherford signed him big time. Rutherford knows what he's worth, and Rutherford was right. I recall writing that was probably $1 million overpay. Yeah, all things considered, yeah, Rutherford was right. Okay, odds the league will do something to fix the LTIR problem. Well, they're not really going to fix it so much as maybe make a couple little tweaks to it. And here's why. The GMs don't want it to be fixed. Every GM wants to be able to take advantage of the current rule. Every GM wants to have a Mark Stone who is banged up and beat up, and you can stick on LTIR for the second half of the season, go acquire your goodies, and then get your player back for the playoffs. Every GM wants that. They want the Tampa Bay Vegas situation. They don't want to have the handcuffs put on them through the playoffs, because that's the easiest situation, right? Is essentially making a team play within the salary cap during the playoffs as well. You'd have to make, exemptions or special situations for the Black Aces and those sorts of things, because some teams just get pummeled during a playoff run. And, you don't necessarily, you might have to reconfigure the LTIR minimum days and games in the playoffs. Instead of 10 games, 24 days, maybe you make it 5 games and 10 days or something like that in the playoffs to use LTIR. Or you give a salary cap, whatever it might be. You tinker with it, but it's not going to change. Excuse me. It's not going to change as, I think fans are expecting. Okay. Oh, by the way, the NHLPA also gets a say in that. Wouldn't be surprised if Guentzel lands in Minnesota playing for the Wild. Here's what I would ask about that. Minnesota really isn't a Stanley Cup contender. Minnesota is kind of retooling, rebuilding on the fly here. They still have all of that dead cap space from Ryan Suter and Zach Parise. They're going to have that, I think, long after I'm off this earth. So, if this is Guentzel's big boy contract, I don't see him going to a middling sort of team. Also, maybe why we don't see him go back to the Penguins, by the way. Let's see here. Oh, BJ. Yep, right there, talking about Parise and Sutter. Tyson asks, is there any chance we can dump the Graves contract, or do I believe that he can potentially grow as a player and has any potential value at all? Yeah. Can I answer no to both of those? I think at this point, because so much effort was put into Ryan Graves this season, for Kyle Dubas to kind of publicly flog him was a little shocking, actually. I didn't see that one coming whatsoever. He didn't rip him so much, but he stopped just short of tearing him a new one, and just kind of spanked him instead. Is it possible? Yes. Is it possible to trade him? Yes. To trade Ryan Graves now would cost the Penguins assets. Here's why. And you might say, but teams will see he was decent in Colorado and good in New Jersey. And I will say, absolutely. Teams will have seen that. And so teams might be open to a Ryan Graves trade. The problem is teams would also know it's not going to work with the Penguins. And this isn't about making a fair deal. This is about making the best deal for yourself. And let's just say Team X thinks that they can turn Graves around, but they know he's not going to work in Pittsburgh. So they're not going to offer what they think he might become worth, they're going to offer exactly what he's worth to the Penguins. You understand? Understand the twist there? They're going to say to the Penguins, fine, we'll take Ryan Graves. We'll also take next year's first round pick. And you know what? Toss in Sam Poulin as well. That's what they're going to do. Because they can. Because the Penguins would have no other alternatives other than to try to make it work. And so the second potential to trade Ryan Graves, and we looked at this a few weeks ago on Pittsburgh Hockey Now, was to essentially swap bad contracts. Josh Anderson in Montreal makes $5.5. He's falling kind of out of their lineup as the young players are arriving. You know, that could be something the Penguins do. But is Montreal going to want to take that gamble? Everything is easier said than done. You might even be open to it. And then the reality sort of hits you. The devil you know versus the devil you don't. And would they be like, well, you know what? Josh Anderson actually, if we can get a good half season out of him, then he really has trade value as a gritty power forward. And then we can actually trade him for assets rather than trade him for a bad well, thanks, Kyle, but, call me in December. And there it goes. All right, so where were we? Headed to the NHL trade deadline, or the NHL trades and the free agents. I forget where we left off. I know we were talking about Vancouver. Oh, New Jersey and Markstrom. There's another team. The Canadian national outlets are really intently watching the Ottawa Senators, in addition, of course, to living on Toronto Maple Leafs coverage. They're watching the Ottawa Senators very closely, and Ottawa is also looking for that upgrade in goal. You can't overestimate what soft goaltending does to a team. You just can't. It rips their heart out and shows it to them. You can literally watch players deflate after soft goals, and you can see the lack of confidence. When a player looks at a guy like me and says, oh, no, listen, we have full confidence in XYZ goaltender. Let me translate that. We want to have full confidence in XYZ goalie. We wish we had confidence in that guy. Knowing you have to go score 4 or 5 goals, and even that might not be enough, that wears on a team. That changes your mindset as a player. It even changes the coaches' mindsets. So, the question is, who will Ottawa snake from somebody? Will they jump in and grab Markstrom out of Calgary? Can they... I don't necessarily understand why Nashville still is dangling UC Saros out there. Or why he's still out there. I would think Nashville wants to hold on to him very tightly. At least until... Is it Askarov? Or is that Colorado's backup kid? No, I think Askarov. Actually, I can look it up because he's on my Dynasty Keeper team. Hang on 1 second. Whichever one is in Nashville. Yeah, that's Yaroslav Askarov. So until he shoves Saros out the door, I don't understand why they're still kind of dangling him. Then again, I guess if I get 2 first-round picks, a prospect, and an NHL player, I might consider it too. Can Ottawa do... again, if Ottawa gets a top-flight goalie, now Brady, Tkachuk, and Stützle, and that whole crowd, they get about 6 inches taller. They get a little tougher. They get a little better because they're not worried about protecting their goalie from terrible shots, and they're not worried about having to score 5. They can play hockey knowing that they can even be covered when they make a mistake. Huge, huge difference. And if Ottawa can pull that off, obviously GM Steve Stayhouse knows that they're probably a playoff team too. Speaking of Sam Poulin, how do you think he is growing? We have heard a lot of mediocre prospects that haven't stepped up in years. Do you think he will become an NHL player along with others in that boat? Well, I did scout him when I scouted Wilkes-Barre both times this year, January and in April. Come on, Tyson. Read Pittsburgh Hockey Now every day. Subscribe. Get those scouting reports. I have significant concerns if Poulin will take that final step. And step being the literal problem. On the wing, there's all that stopping and starting, and he doesn't look nearly as fast as when he plays center. Why the Penguins moved him back to wing, I'm not sure. He actually plays a quicker game because he can play with momentum playing in the middle. If the Penguins would make him their fourth line center, I think he could do an okay job. I don't think he is ever going to be an impactful NHL player. I certainly don't think he's ever going to go to bed at night not wondering or worrying about his NHL future. I think he's always going to be a bubble player. He might get over the hump and be on this side of the bubble, but he's always going to be, I think, within reach, a few bad weeks or, bad half season of being sent back down. What prospects do I think could make the jump soon or finally growing into their potential? Obviously, Joel Blomqvist is the guy at the top of the list. I don't think he's quite ready. Give him another half season or maybe a whole season in Wilkes-Barre. The guy I was really impressed with was Tristan Brose. He really improved his skating over the last year plus. I mean, he really played a quicker, grittier game in those 2 games with Wilkes-Barre Scranton, the 2 playoff games. He got in on the forecheck and he got wide and he really looked pretty good doing it. Now, I don't know if he was in the right position or not. I don't think he knows, but he was playing hard and he was actually playing fast. He was a factor in those games for the positive. We haven't seen Vasily Ponomarev. He was hurt 4 games after the Penguins acquired him in the Jake Guentzel deal. I think they are expecting him to compete for an NHL job in training camp and the preseason. Koivunen, Ville Koivunen. There were several big flaws in his game, and I mean substantial flaws. For that, I'll make you read the PHM Plus scouting. So go on the Pittsburgh Hockey Now website. He will need a good year, 2 years in Wilkes-Barre to work on those. They are not unsolvable, but I also wonder about his skating because it all kind of created one big ball of wax there. So I don't think you'll see him next fall, certainly. Braden Yeager is the guy who Yeager's play on video and his stat sheet belied what I saw up in Saginaw at the Memorial Cup. Just flat out, I was waiting for a guy to take the puck and, kind of, if not dominate the game, certainly make a big impact on it. I can't say that Yeager made an impact on the Memorial Cup games. I was actually quite disappointed. There were some flaws in his game, too. He certainly has no problem playing defense, but he would get a little drifty. He would drift here, he would drift there. leaving big lanes open. So he has to learn a lot of the professional game before he comes to the NHL. Why did the Capitals buy Cap Friendly, and why are they killing it? Man, fans are just all kinds of bent out of shape about this. Let me explain this. I mean, I'm kind of, listen, the Capitals did right by themselves. Understand that when Kyle Dubas arrived with the Pittsburgh Penguins, he realized they did not have an internal infrastructure with all of that information. They began building it. It ain't easy. So the Capitals decide they want their own salary and player infrastructure, IT infrastructure. And they're like, wow, it's going to take us a year and a half, 2 years to build this. It's going to cost us probably several $100,000, if not more. Let's buy Cap Friendly. Ta-da! They're done. They get everything they want in one stroke of the pen, writing of the checkbook. It's probably going to cost them less to buy Cap Friendly than it would have cost to build their own. So that's one part of it. And then they can also start adding proprietary information, internal projections, so on and so forth. They can really spruce it up if they choose. So they're not killing it so much as they're not going to let you or me see their internal data, projections, scouting reports. That's where all that's going to go. When a scout goes to Hershey or, is scouting draft eligible prospects, they're going to log on to that website. And they're going to write their scouting report in that website probably. And the GM the next morning is going to go through Cap Friendly, or what was Cap Friendly, and look for Scout X, Player Y, and read the scouting report. They're not killing it. And I kind of, like, fans are just going bonkers over this. One, there will always be a need and a desire for that data. So now that I'm kind of stepbrothers with Puckpedia, we're both on the same platform in July. That's who, our new business partner is part owner of Puckpedia. We're all going on the same platform. We're all going to be sharing data, information, and somebody might come to Puckpedia, because Puckpedia also sells some of the IT data and infrastructure to NHL teams. So that's why. I mean, these teams need it. And think back. I know some of you know who Sam Ventura is. 10 years ago, Sam was a student at Carnegie Mellon. He and his professor, who was a real numbers guy from San Francisco, I think he had done some previous work with the San Francisco Giants or Minnesota Twins. Forgive me if I have a couple of smaller details of that part of the story wrong. Those two started War on Ice, which was the precursor to Cap Friendly and Puckpedia. They lasted about 2 years. And listen, God bless them. They even consulted me on some of the stats, like a high danger chance. And I wish I had understood the importance of it back then. I kind of, I played along. I'm like, I don't think you really can define a high danger chance, because let's just say a guy gets a rip from the dot. It's a high danger chance if there's traffic in front of the net. It's probably not that much of a high danger chance if the goalie sees it cleanly. And I don't know how you can quantify that. And they're like, oh, yeah, that kind of makes good sense. But ultimately, I think they decided that if it's within this zone, it's a high danger chance, which is where Natural Stat Trick does as well. That's kind of why I think the Penguins' analytics were so good this season and their results were so bad. Were those nuances in analytics. But both of those guys got snapped up by teams. The Penguins were like, hey, Sam, you're one of us now. You're on this side of the press box. And his professor went somewhere. And I don't know if they actually sold War on Ice to a team first or if they just closed it down because they both got jobs. Regardless, this is how things sort of go until all the teams catch up. Actually, hey, if any teams are watching, just call me. We can do this. you pay me what you think it's worth, and I will happily take that check because it will cost me about 1/10. But I digress. All right, kids, that is exactly 1 hour. I am gonna let's read the final few questions here. Oh, here. Okay, Tyson. Just go to Pittsburgh Hockey now. You'll see the PHN Plus articles, and you can see those scouting reports. Appreciate you. Dan Dubas said the main priority is acquiring young players, draft picks, and prospects. Yes. We don't exactly have blue chip assets to move for them. So how do we do it? Okay, this is the perfect final question upon which to end this week's live chat. You don't. Ta-da! The reality of the Penguins situation is they will have to go with a quantity over quality approach and hope to hit. There really isn't another way to do it. There's no one they can trade for a first-round pick, with the exception possibly of Marcus Pettersson. I think he's the only guy that they could trade for a first-rounder right now. Perhaps if Chris Letang decided he wanted out of what's to come, maybe get a first-round pick for him. But again, that 35-plus contract, that is a noose just sort of swinging on the gallows, waiting for a team to stick its head through. I don't expect Sidney Crosby to get traded ever. So Rickard Rakell, until he returns to 25-goal form, is not worth a first-round pick. Riley Smith certainly is not. Erik Karlsson seems to be content anyway, at least for now, to stick around. So he is not worth a first-rounder. Although I suspect if they traded Erik Karlsson, that's about what they would get, would be a first-rounder. I still am not sure if Karlsson is dead set on winning a Stanley Cup, why he wouldn't ask out when clearly the Penguins have a lot of work to do to get back to true contending status. But maybe he likes Pittsburgh. Maybe he doesn't want the trade again, doesn't want all that hassle again. I don't know. Anyway, that's where we stand, and that's how the Penguins are going to have to approach it. One thing they can do, and this is probably closer to 15 years ago now, certainly a decade ago, in baseball, the Houston Astros decided they were going to rebuild. And instead of their owner just delivering armored trucks of cash to old free agents to keep winning one year to the next and having to buy new, and spend $100 million. That was back when that was a lot of money in baseball. What Houston did was they just started taking up everybody's failed prospects. All of those Sam Poulin types who hadn't made it after 4 or 5 years, the team was souring, and Houston just started snapping them up as many as they could, thinking, okay, at some point people saw talent in these players. Let's see if we can resurrect a couple or a few of these. And they did. They said, okay, this didn't work. Let's try this with you. Let's try that with you. And they got, some real players out of the deal. And then those players found the garbage lids and drumsticks to win a World Series. So all's well that ends well, right? Okay, kids, we will do this again next Wednesday at noon. It's always a blast hanging out with you. And like, subscribe, and we'll talk again. Have fun.